Hey everyone, we're back with our speakers from this week's Exploring Science, Veronica and Matt. I'm going to be asking Veronica some questions. So Veronica gave a really cool talk about working memory in the prefrontal cortex. We played that kind of hard working memory game where you tried to remember which letters came a couple letters before. I found it really difficult. So some of the questions that came up during the event, how heavy is the human brain?
Great question. The human brain is about 3 pounds and makes up about 2% of your whole body weight, but it varies depending on the size of the human. So I think the heaviest brain ever is maybe over 4 pounds, 4 pounds and 4.3 pounds or something like that. So it varies, but size does not correlate with smartness. So.
Interesting. So when people say you have a big head, that doesn't really say anything about your intelligence.
Exactly. Einstein had a smaller than average brain.
Cool. All right. We also had some questions about how information gets to the brain and how it gets around in there. So what would happen if someone grabbed a body part like your arm or your leg?
Good question. So I think I had talked about how in your frontal cortex, we talked about the prefrontal cortex, and there's also that piece that was for motor output. So similar to how there's different parts of that area of your motor cortex that are important for sending information, let's say to your fingers and your hand and your arm if you're going to wave to your friend down the hall, there's also a part of your cortex that's behind that motor area that's in that parietal lobe that I talked about that was yellow on the slide. So there's an area in your cortex that is the only thing it does is just receive information from your body. And so similar to what I talked about, how different body parts might need a little bit more motor control, so there's going to be more cells dedicated to moving those parts. It's the same thing for receiving incoming information. So if somebody grabs your arm or you touch something else, then there are a bunch of different types of sensory proteins and things that your body uses to help you tell whether something is being pokey or whether there's pressure or if you're feeling a hot or cold temperature. And then that information goes through your nerves that are in your arms, if somebody's grabbing your arm, and up to your brain into this area of the brain that then receives that information and says, oh, my arm is being touched or I'm feeling pressure on my fingertip. The information goes both ways.
Wow, that's really cool. What about sound? How does sound go to the frontal cortex when you're trying to figure out what sounds are going on?
Interesting question. So when I was explaining the different lobes of the brain, I talked about how the very back of your head, there's the occipital lobe, which receives all your visual information. That was blue on the slide. There's also an area of your brain that receives all the auditory information, which is sound information. So when it comes in from your ears, it goes into this part of the brain that helps process what tones you're hearing, what sounds you're hearing. And then that information will go through, let's say if it's a sound that's related to a memory, then that might go to the area of the brain that's important for memory. But if you're using sound to help do different things that you need working memory for, then there's also different ways that sound information then gets sent. Remember I talked about gray matter and white matter? So the area of the brain that's processing all the incoming sound is going to send a track, an insulated axon or a route through that white matter to another area of gray matter in the frontal cortex if you need that sound information for working memory.
Cool. So depending on what that sound is going to be used for and where it's coming from, it might go somewhere different in the brain. That's really
maybe if you're trying to remember a tune to figure out what song you're listening to, and you might recall or try to hold on to just a couple notes and figure out what that sound is, then that sound information is going to be sent to your frontal cortex to hold in working memory.
Awesome. And one final question for you. For people who have Alzheimer's disease, does their working memory have damage?
Great question. So we talked a little bit, I think I answered a question about what happens when dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is damaged, which is the area that's important for working memory, and how people start to have working memory deficits. So they might have difficulty with conversations or remembering, why they walked into a room and sorts of things like that. So in Alzheimer's disease, having damage to this area is also part of the process for some people. So we can use whether or not a patient that's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, if they happen to start showing these same problems, like having difficulty following conversations, having difficulty remembering why they walked into a room or where they set their keys down a couple moments ago. That gives us an indication that they're also starting to have damage to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So it doesn't happen in everybody, but we do see a lot of, most patients do tend to have damage, and it just means that the cells that I talked about, how I record, you can stick a little recording in and listen to those cells that are active. Maybe they're helping you remember the letter A. It means that those cells are slowly being damaged and dying in conditions like Alzheimer's disease. So yeah, we do see working memory deficits in patients that have that diagnosis, definitely.
Wow.
Very good.
Awesome. Thanks so much for answering these questions and for the amazing talk on Tuesday. I'm going to pass this off to Rick and Matt.
All right, and we're back with Matt. We had a couple technical difficulties, but we're going to get these questions answered for you because we know we had some lingering questions after the awesome presentation Matt had for us with talking about lasers. And one of the big questions I think we can use to recap here is, are lasers one specific color, or could you change a laser's color at any time that you wanted to, or how exactly does that work, Matt?
Right, so a laser is going to be one specific color when it outputs. It has a few there's like a few things on the edge that it's not perfectly one wavelength, but it's always just going to be one color. And there are ways to go about changing the laser color. So you can use different kind of optics, which is something I mentioned at the beginning. There's different kind of instruments that can change the color of the laser. But in terms of kind of just the laser itself, it's really hard to you're not really going to change the color of a laser on its own. You need something external that will change the laser's color.
I see. So could you just put like a piece of colored glass in front of the laser to where you just like, if you have a blue laser and you put a red one, will it make a purple laser, or how does that work?
So no, that's not going to unfortunately work. That would be cool if it did. So what you actually have to do is light has a specific wavelength or a specific frequency. And in order to change the color, you have to change that wavelength or that frequency, or in that frequency, to get it to be a different color. So you have a different compound, some sort of crystal usually, that you'll shine a laser through that crystal, and then it will change its frequency, which then changes its color. So you could change a red laser beam into a purple laser beam, something like that.
I see, but it's not as simple as what you have sometimes seen in like art class with the different lights and plastic things.
No, it's not going to be that simple, yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, so a lot of your work with lasers was trying to understand solar panels and photovoltaics and what you call them. So is there a type of light that maybe is not the sun that can be used for solar panels?
So yeah, as long as it's any sort of light that can be absorbed by silicon, it can be used. So you can use a light bulb since that's visible light. The problem is that in order to power that light bulb, you need to use energy. So it's kind of like you're using energy to make energy, and probably you're using more energy to power that light bulb than you're actually getting out of the solar panel itself. So you can use any light, but the reason we want to use the sun is because that doesn't require any power coming in, and it's just energy that's coming from us to the sun that we can use without having to worry about wasting power, I guess.
I see. So unless your neighbors are paying for the electricity bill, then it wouldn't work, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so one final question that I've often thought about is, on the movies, it seems like lasers are like this long line, basically, and not just a point, like a dot, like we see with our laser pointers. So can you explain what the discrepancy is there?
Right. So in order for you to actually see the light from the laser beam, it has to reflect off of something. So kind of with like a laser pointer and your cat, it has to hit the floor for your cat to be able to see it or something like that. So since light travels so fast, we can't really see it with the human eye. So that's why we need to be able, that's why it needs to hit a surface for us to see it. So like in those movies that you're talking about, you'll notice like the spies, they'll usually kind of, spray like some sort of aerosol in the air, and those now create particles that the laser beam can kind of reflect off of, and then you can kind of see them. So that's why, before they walk through the hallway, you see nothing, and then they spray it, and you can now see those laser beams that they have to try and maneuver around.
Okay, I see. So if you want to go into the spy field, you definitely need to grab a can of aerosol to keep with you at all times.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
you heard it from a laser scientist here, so take that to the bank. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Matt. We really appreciate it, and I know the students are going to enjoy watching these follow-up questions. Thanks a lot.
Great. Yeah. I definitely enjoyed giving the talk. I hope some people learned some cool stuff about lasers.